Today's talk is titled Why I Believe in God Still, to be delivered by Lloyd Moffett. Stephen sent his bio to me through ChatGPT. And his bio comes out as Stephen Lloyd Moffett is a professor of comparative religion at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. He is also an internationally known scholar for religious studies. He has many interests in religion, including the mystical life of Cesar Chavez, religion in modern Greece, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and ignorance of Islam in America. The relationship between religion and wine. Lloyd Moffett's approach to teaching is agnostic, with an objective attitude toward all faiths. He has been described as a professor who presents various religions in an unbiased approach. I give you Stephen Lloyd Moffett.
It's interesting to have ChatGPT tell you who you are, but I thought I'd go with it. It's so nice to be back here. I've done this more than a dozen times to be with you. Sometimes my topics are kind of an extension of school, except for you don't have exams and I don't get complaints after them. So, but this one's more personal. For me, it's something that's been on my mind a lot recently. In some ways, it's much more prescriptive than descriptive. It's one of the oldest questions of humanity, and that is God. But I hope I take this subject in a new way, at least for some of you, and explain why I believe in God still. But let me set the context. I would say most of my students are really uncomfortable with the notion of God. They are deathly afraid of labels of any kind, so they won't call themselves atheists, they won't call themselves agnostics, but they're equally hesitant to call themselves believers. Of course, for the rest of the country, that doesn't come as a surprise that my coastal Californian Christians or Californian students are non-committal heathens. But surveys suggest that my students are not alone among young people in America. A poll came out last year that 70% of millennials and Gen Z have significant doubts about the traditional conception of God, compared to less than 35% of people over the age of 65. A Gallup poll came out a couple of years ago that showed that the percentage of young people who believe in God has dropped by over 10% in the last 3 years alone. You might think that young people never have believed in God, but going back in 2001, they did a poll and 90% of young people believed in God in 2001. Today, it's less than 60%. To put it in terms that they understand, I think for human history, God has been the ultimate influencer. But he has been hemorrhaging followers recently, and the title of ultimate influencer now seems to be not God, but somebody with the last name Kardashian or whatever Cutie Pie is. Now, as someone with a doctorate in religious studies, I feel like I could present reasons why I think there's a general decline in belief. But one thing that one area where I've been experiencing growth personally and in teaching is learning to listen. Deep listening has become a prerequisite for me for deep thinking. And a lot can be learned by just asking questions. I found this particularly in my work in teaching about Islam. I've given 150 public talks on Islam since 9/11. And no matter how clear I think I present Islam, somebody always comes out afterwards to share with me about why I should be really, really scared of Islam. And I think my instinct early on was being like, okay, here's all the things you have wrong. But what I've done over the last decade is really asked, okay, well, what is Islam to you? And they usually present this tradition of a manipulous, murderous cult that wants to annihilate them and everyone they care about. And my response has become, well, if that's what Islam is, I'd be really scared. But it's not. So maybe we should look at it with fresh eyes. And so I've started to ask my students who don't want to believe in God anymore. Okay, who is God to you? Now, there are some who bring up like the problem of evil, like how could a good God allow for so much suffering? I can't believe in that. But most of the time, it's much more prosaic. My students tell me their idea of God is a moral cop that doesn't want me to have any fun. God is a harsh judge who wants to send people, especially gay people, to hell. God is who Republicans resort to in order to excuse their disregard for the poor and vulnerable. Or perhaps more positively, God is the one who will give me an A even if I don't study. Or some variation. But I have to say, when I hear their definition of God, I usually agree. I don't believe in that God either. If that's who God is, I wouldn't believe in that. And so it's made me contemplate, what depiction of God can I believe in? And more importantly, what is a conception of God that I think young people will accept? So today I want to present a version of God that I think I can embrace, and I think others might find attractive as well. Now I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting this is who God is. This is not a revelation from on high, but an act of creative imagination. It's bound up in the human struggle to define something that I think ultimately human language and concepts is just ill-equipped to capture definitively. We can aspire to give form and language to God, but however human effort aims at being precise here, our human efforts are always this side of transcendence. I'm not saying who God is, I'm just saying who God could be. Now, Islam says there's 99 names of God, with the 100th being eternally hidden. Hinduism often says there's 108 forms of God, and mystical Judaism, there's at least 10 sephirot, or emanations from the Godhead who is unknowable. So I just want to present this as one of the 99, or one of the 108, or one of the 10. It's a human, feeble attempt to give form to mystery that I know will remain beyond what is capable of the little gray cells between our ears. So what definition of God do I think the young and discontent might latch onto? So I don't want to present God as a higher being akin to a person writ large, but rather I want to present God as the act of love that connects, binds, and heals. God is a word that signifies a unifying force in the universe and is present wherever and in whatever form love is active. When we say God is present, what I think we mean is there's a harmonizing energy active around us, bringing wholeness to division, healing from decimation, and hope from despair. We don't want to see God here as a static being reigning on high, but a dynamic mode of becoming, a force between things rather than a thing in itself. Now, people often say, you have to either believe in God or don't believe in God. You're a theist or an atheist. And I'm not sure that such a dichotomy works in this definition of God. Instead of believing, you are either doing God or not doing God. Perhaps it is a how of life rather than a belief one holds. And I'm increasingly convinced that any person that knows love, deep in unconditional love, knows God regardless of your religious affiliation. The closer one gets to finding love in all things, the closer they are to God, no matter what you call yourself. As the Christian apostle John says in our reading today, whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. I take that literally, no exceptions. If God, John continues, if we love one another, God abides in us and love is perfected in us. Again, no exceptions here. And while many priests and pastors, rabbis and imams might not like this, I feel confident saying that our world is full of godly people who know no official religion, at least in the name we recognize with a list of dues-paying members. I'm confident saying that there is also many religious people who seem to not know God, at least as I'm presenting it now. And this definition of God has made me recode familiar phrases. For example, when people tell me that they want God at the center of their marriage, I no longer think that they're referring to an awkward throuple where each spouse hopes that the superhuman third takes their side in an argument. But rather, when they say God is the center of my marriage, they say the spirit of unconditional love is at the center of our relationship going forward. So maybe we say that God is present in every healthy marriage, not because of some past wedding ceremony that happened in a church or synagogue, but because without active love, a marriage withers and dies. So God is a word that signifies a dynamic process of love. I like how theologian John Caputo puts it in an essay called On Religion. He says, God is a name we put on love. Listen to that again. God is a name we put on love. And this means that it might be better to think not of God as a noun in a typical sense, but rather as a verb that we signal with a noun. And I'm suggesting that God is not a person or a being, but a way of becoming, a process. I think this concept is hard for our mind to wrap around, but I find some metaphors that come out of Buddhism helpful here, because we often use nouns to signify processes. Let me mention a few that are typically used in Buddhism. One metaphor they use is the analogy of a stream. If someone says, I'm going fishing at a stream, we talk like there's something permanent there, like I'm going to the Colorado River as if it's a thing. However, in fact, a stream is always changing. New water is coming in and going. The banks are always shifting. The depth and the temperature is always shifting. There's no static entity called the Colorado River, but rather the Colorado River becomes a name or a placard that stands in for an ever-changing dynamic process. Well, perhaps we should think of God as the same. God is the constant flow of love, or something like that. To switch analogies, think of a hurricane. It should be obvious that a hurricane is nothing more than a constantly moving swirl, changing patterns of energy and atmosphere that is never the same at any moment or at any place. A hurricane never stands still. But we give hurricanes names as if they were static beings. We even call them, like Hurricane Katrina goes into New Orleans, or Hurricane Andrew destroyed thousands of boats. Well, maybe we should see God as the whirlwind of love, or something like that. Or think of a fire. We say that we're going to go sit by the fire and the fire will keep us warm, as if it's a static being. But it's really just a process. A fire is heat consuming some sort of fuel. So to be more accurate, we should say something like we're sitting near the flaming that's happening, or something like that. We speak of a fire dying out, but what we really mean is that the fire is flaming less or less frequently. Well, maybe God is a fire of love that sometimes burns brighter in our lives and offers warmth. And sometimes perhaps that fire of love dies in our hearts or in our society, and we experience it as darkness. Here's the point. Instead of seeing God as a being that chooses sides, that picks winners and losers and apparently desperately wants us to tell him how great he is, perhaps God is better seen as a spirit of active love that connects and harmonizes and unifies. Now, seeing God in this dynamic form changes the mythic narrative of the religious stories that define our culture. For example, when people now ask me, do I believe that God created the world? Well, I recode that in my mind to say active love is what originated and perpetuated the world. I'm no scientist, but I think even some evolutionary biologists would say amen to that statement. The world was created through a million impulses of love. In the ancient world, people would sacrifice to God, but now, sacrificing animals seems quaint or antiquated. But in my frame, don't we sacrifice to God every time we love uncomfortably? Every time we give ourselves to love? I mean, what we leave at the altar is the love we show other people, and we feed God, so to speak, with the love that we show others. And perhaps this is what religion meant when it, in the ancient world, say it demands sacrifice. Yes, in the ancient world, that meant an animal, but we should not forget that historically that animal was sacrificed, but then it was given to the community as a meal, probably the tastiest and most nutritious meal of the year. That was an act of love for other people. So when we sacrifice to God, what we say is give uncomfortably for the good of others. I'm also recoded when people say, does God judge us? I do think God judges us, but not as a stern magistrate that dishes out punishments based on some ancient arbitrary law, but rather I recode that statement to say that God will judge us by saying that the spirit of love will be the test of our actions. And when love reigns in our life, that spirit will carry over to whatever happens when these cells die. If God is the center of your life, that is to say, active love is the center of your life, that energy will shape our realities both here and for whatever comes next. And so presenting God as a name we give to active love potentially changes our relationship to all the historical religions that I have the privilege of introducing to our students. My sense is that many people still see religions as discrete options in a multiple choice test called life. There's got to be one religion out there that's right, and there's eternal consequences if I fail this quiz. One is right and will be evident when we see the pearly gates. This is the view I think most Americans have, and they often ask me, okay, well, which one is it? Which one's right? Now, some will choose all of the above, and many of those people end up Unitarians. But that's a spiritual destination too. On my exams, if all of the above is right, it means that the slots that fill A, B, C, and D are wrong. And while I appreciate the place in the heart where all the above folks come from, it's just another answer competing with other answers. But what if we recalibrate our relationship to the historical religions by shifting how we see them? Instead of being prepackaged answers to life that we have to accept whole scale, what if we see them as source books for developing our picture of dynamic love and active love, for developing our picture of God? What if the world's traditions are just treasuries of images, myths, and symbols that help us fill in our picture of God who is love? In other words, when love is my religion, the vast treasure of the world religions all constitute a collective hymnal, a worldwide devotional song to God. So perhaps we need to become sort of spiritual nomads who search for the love-giving elements within each religion, finding inspiration, depth, and meaning from the face of love that they've cultivated over the years. For example, I'm drawn to the Christian notion of the Trinity. People ask if I believe in the Trinity. I think to myself, yes, but probably not as you think I do. The Godhead is active love, as we've been saying, but Jesus becomes the embodiment of that love. As John says in our reading today, Jesus is the love of God made manifest among us. And I think he's become that symbol for billions of people across time. For the example he sets is to show love to the people that are the hardest to love, the abused, the downtrodden, the emotionally and physically scarred. So the living Jesus is the embodiment of active love, God made manifest on earth. When we say that Jesus is fully human and fully divine, all we're saying is that Jesus passed down to us as totally and fully love. I've also sort of evolved a little bit because I've sort of often qualified things saying when they say Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. I was like, okay, that's the part I've had issues with. But I've actually changed over the last couple of days of thinking about this. Only begotten is that God only appears as love. If you want to say that God appears as judgment, no, that's not God. Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. That is the only form that God manifests on earth is love, not any other. Holy Spirit becomes less of a mystery then. Anytime love is present between two or three, there's the spirit of love, which is my definition of God. It's the ongoing presence of God on earth. And whenever the Spirit of God is present, there is love by definition. So to me, the Holy Spirit is the third member of the Trinity works too. That's one of the lessons of Christianity to me. But I don't subscribe that we only look to Christianity. I think I find solace in many other ones. I find particular meaning and inspiration from Krishna's love for the gopis, particularly Radha. This image of love reminds me that active love can be playful, lila in Sanskrit. And yes, sometimes love can be heavy and sacrificial, but sometimes it requires dancing and singing and grinning. When Krishna devotees say they have God within them, it shows in the joy that seems to exude out of at least some of them. The best of them shoot joy from every pore and can warm your soul with just a look or a hug. Krishna reminds me that God is joyous energy that we feel among our closest friends, family, and lovers. Ram and Sita in Hinduism remind me that God's as active love is patient and loyal. Ram goes to the end of the earth to find Sita, and Sita remains forever dedicated to him during the separation. The epic love between Ram and Sita is a picture of God, not the whole picture, but their relationship presents us one face of God. Divine love as patient and loyal. And when we reflect that in our relationships, we embody this divine love. We become an avatar of God. This is an aspect of love for some of us can be hard to embody. The Tao and Taoism reminds me that God as is a harmonizing force in the universe is built into the very structures of the universe. When we talk about feng shui or to turn to nature as our guide, as Taoism suggests, these dictates remind us to look closely at the world and find love within it. It means having God within us asks us to slow down, to observe closely, to discover love in the most subtle structures of the universe. The world is comprised of a matrix of love, yet we rarely pay attention enough to recognize it, let alone tap into it. That's how Taoism is recoded for me. But I have to say, in this global religion of God as active love, my favorite prophet comes from the Islamic tradition, Rumi, the great prophet and poet of love. He was born more than 800 years ago, but he's having a little bit of a moment in contemporary America. Over the past decade, he's been the best-selling poet in the world in almost every single year, and inspired countless Instagram memes and hipster tattoos. My students usually cannot name a single member of Congress or a contemporary spiritual leader, but they know a 13th century Islamic mystic somehow. And I get why young people are drawn to Rumi. Why he comes out of the Islamic tradition, he is first and foremost a follower of love. His poems are tributes to a kind of love that transcends time and religious tradition. His God is simply love, even if he learns of this God through the religion of Muhammad. He may be a Muslim, but the classical Shahada, there's no God but God, Muhammad is messenger, gets recast in his mind. He calls it the Shahada of the heart, and that goes, there's no God but love, and I am his messenger. Now, of course, Rumi says that way more poetically than I can put together. So in our first reading today, it says, the law of wonder rules my life at last. I burn each second of my life to love. Each second of my life burns out in love. In each leaping second, love lives afresh. My sense is that this is the highest inspiration of the religion of active love. For each leaping second, love lives afresh. And when people ask me what I am, I said, I'm supportive of any religious framework that longs for such an aspiration, to make love live afresh in each moment, to allow God to fill each moment, each breath, each relation with another. Spiritual life is cultivating this longing, seeking to perfect this longing. Now, Rumi elsewhere employs an analogy that speaks to me. There's a little background here. The first dog that I ever had on my own was a mutt that we rescued out of the Walla Walla Pound. His name was Atticus. He was a hound dog. He had been on a farm with lots of dogs, and eventually the farmer had to give him up. And after getting Atticus and adopting him, a few days afterwards, we left him for the first time, locked behind a door. But instead of barking or scratching, he howled. He howled a bellowing hound dog in the bayou type of howl. We'd known him just for a couple of days, and yet he missed us deeply. I think in this moment, because there's another poem by Rumi that speaks of this as a goal of spiritual life. He says, listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. It is love's longing. There are love dogs that no one knows the name of. Give your life to be one of them. There are love dogs that no one knows the name of. Give your life to be one of them. This is a spiritual goal and image of God that I think the young and disaffected by traditional religion may be able to grasp onto. Again, I don't want to suggest that this is who God is, or that other definitions are wrong. I can't tell other people that they don't know God. Maybe sometimes it doesn't seem like they know my God, but to be fair, I don't usually get their God either. So I'll give them space. But by stating these things publicly, I fully admit that this definition will not resonate with most, and with many, in certain circles, it will certainly be deemed blasphemous. But I want to suggest that perhaps it deserves a place among the 99 names of God, or the 108 forms of God, or the 10 emanations of God. Is one image of God that I hope some people will find helpful. So why do I still believe in God? Because I've found a new definition of God that resonates with my experiences. I've seen the power of active love to heal the world. I've had friends show up during the saddest and hardest times in my life. I've seen the universe forge harmony out of seeming chaos. I've seen surprising hope emerge out of despondent despair. I've seen active love. And so I've seen God. And I can't help but still say, I believe.